Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday, before it became the day I began planning how to bury the past. Maybe it was the illusion of unity I once craved. Or maybe it was just my mother's sweet potato casserole, always laced with too much cinnamon and just enough love to make you forget the rest. But last Thanksgiving didn't taste like any of the others. It was bitter. It was final. I wish I could say I didn't see it coming. But you always feel the knife before it lands, especially when it's family holding the handle. My name is Kimberly Carlson. I was 34 last November, a single mother to Donald, my 7-year-old anchor in a world that never stopped trying to drown me. I'd always been the family's black mark, a stain on their starched reputation. My father never missed a chance to remind me. Their home in Beaufort, Georgia, still looked like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life, wraparound porch, creaking swing, wreath on the door. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and pine needles masked the rot beneath the wood-paneled walls. Family portraits from the last 4 decades lined the hallway like museum exhibits, frozen smiles covering up decades of silent grudges and unfinished wars. And still, I came back. Year after year. Like a fool feeding herself to the same fire, hoping it might not burn this time. That day, the house was loud with laughter that didn't reach the eyes. Andrew and his wife Margaret had arrived from Raleigh with their 5-year-old twins, Melissa and Brian, tiny hurricanes in glitter and sneakers. Mom was in full hostess mode, darting between the kitchen and dining room, straightening forks, smoothing invisible wrinkles, acting as if she could curate peace if the china was aligned just right. By 3 o'clock, dinner was served. The fireplace crackled, turkey filled the air, and every surface sparkled with an exhausting kind of perfection. Donald wore his best shirt, one I had ironed the night before with a prayer and a sigh. He lasted 5 minutes before cranberry sauce found its way onto the fabric. I smiled. He was trying. He was always trying. I settled him at the kids' table, a folding card table by the window, then took my place beside my mother at the long dining table, under the weight of a chandelier that always reminded me of a noose. Conversation limped along. Margaret chirped about soccer practice and school fundraisers. Andrew puffed up with tales of his latest bank promotion. Dad barely grunted, knuckles clenched around his fork like it might leap from his hand. I tried to cut through the stiffness with a light story about Donald and the neighbor's runaway poodle, but my voice fell flat. Mom darted her eyes toward Dad. Margaret smiled too wide. Andrew cleared his throat and checked his phone. Still, I played along. Smiled. Nodded. Pretended. Donald was quietly rolling a toy truck back and forth under the table, the twins were whispering mischief, and I reminded myself that silence was survivable. I'd endured worse. I could endure this. But then the room cracked. Dad's fist came down like a judge's gavel, sharp and final. The silverware jumped. A wine glass tipped, blood-red liquid blooming across the white tablecloth like a wound reopening. Silence strangled the air. He rose slowly, rage radiating off him like heat. And then the words, sharp as broken glass, deliberate, rehearsed in whatever bitter chamber he called a heart. You are a disgrace, Kimberly. The words hung there, vibrating through bone and memory. A single mother. A leech. Why can't you get it together like the rest of us? I didn't move. Couldn't. Donald had stopped playing. He looked up, brown eyes wide, sensing the shift even if he didn't understand the history behind it. My face burned, but I held my breath and stayed silent. He wanted a scene. I wouldn't give it to him. Not yet. Dad wasn't finished. He never was. His voice rose, as though he needed the whole neighborhood to hear. As though humiliation was a kind of exorcism. We gave you everything, and you spit it back in our faces. You could have had a decent life. Instead, you parade around like some martyr. You embarrass us, Kimberly, every time you show up here, you drag this family down. I looked at my mother, silently begging for a word, a glance, anything. She didn't lift her eyes. Just twisted her napkin, over and over, like she was trying to wring out her own guilt. Andrew opened his mouth, then shut it again, gaze glued to his untouched mashed potatoes. Cowardice came easy to him. It always had. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, knuckles white. They didn't know. They didn't know that I'd kept them afloat, paid the mortgage when they were months from losing the house, covered Andrew's law school tuition when he was drowning in debt, gifted Dad that shiny new car he bragged about to everyone at church. They had no idea where the checks had come from. They assumed God had answered their prayers. But it was me. It had always been me. And now, with the taste of ash in my mouth and Donald watching from the shadows of a ruined afternoon, I knew something inside me had finally snapped. This wasn't just a holiday anymore. It was the beginning of a reckoning. They all believed Dad's pension from 30 years at the power company paid for everything, the house, the renovations, even the food we'd just eaten. That myth had served them well. But standing there, with his voice still echoing in my bones and my child watching with wet eyes, I knew something inside me had shifted. I was done hiding. Dad's face had gone the color of overripe fruit. He leaned forward, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger as if casting some final judgment. "Get out," he growled. "You're not welcome here. Not until you clean up your mess and stop dragging this family into your failures." I stood slowly, anchoring my voice before it escaped me. My hands trembled, but I didn't let it show. I'd mastered that art years ago. "All right," I said quietly. There was no point in defending myself to people who preferred their lies over the truth. Donald looked up at me, lower lip trembling, his toy truck hanging loose in his fingers. I bent down, scooped him gently into my arms. He clung to me with the blind trust of someone who hadn't yet learned how cruel people could be. I whispered in his ear, voice soft but certain. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're going home." In the hallway, I grabbed our coats. Slipped his arms into his little puffer brionet, zipped it up, kissed his forehead. I picked up my purse with a grace I didn't feel. No one moved. No one spoke. As I opened the front door, the sharp bite of November air slapped my cheeks. Cold. Clean. Honest. I walked down the steps slowly, each heel strike on the wooden porch sounding like a gavel. Behind me, the door remained open. Not a soul followed. At the curb, I buckled Donald into his booster seat. He clutched his truck to his chest, eyes wide and searching. I gave him a smile, steady, even if it didn't reach my eyes. Then I looked back at the house, that shrine to appearances and unspoken resentments. And I felt nothing. No sorrow. No nostalgia. Just a quiet, long overdue freedom. They didn't know. Couldn't possibly fathom. The world they lived in, the one they clung to so smugly, it stood on a foundation I had built in silence. Every bite of food, every stick of furniture, every mortgage payment and luxury car had been financed by the daughter they dismissed as an embarrassment. My empire, my $94 million empire, was a ghost to them. A phantom they never bothered to question. Because it was easier to believe I was a failure than to accept that I'd outgrown them 1,000 times over. For years, I let them. I wore the mask, played the part, bit my tongue through their judgments. Because anonymity was easier than confrontation. But as I drove away, taillights fading from their view and Donald safe in the back seat, I felt something shift inside me. Thanksgiving, they said, was about family. That day, I learned it was about knowing when to stop bleeding for people who wouldn't notice if you vanished. The truth is, they never really knew me. Not when I lived under their roof. Not when I sat at their table, smiling through their thinly veiled contempt. Not even when I returned, year after year, hoping they might see the woman I had become. I could feel it in every glance from my mother when I laughed too loud or mentioned work. I saw it in Andrew's stiff politeness, his empty questions that begged for short answers. To them, I was chaos. A broken thing that didn't quite fit into their pristine puzzle. The girl with the baby and no ring. The woman with ambition and no apology. What they never knew, what they chose not to see, was that those business trips, those strange hours, those late-night calls weren't signs of failure. They were the seeds of something colossal. It began 5 years earlier, in a cramped apartment on the outer edge of Denver. I was 29, newly alone, swollen with fear and carrying Donald under my heart. I had 2 months of rent left and a second-hand laptop that overheated after 30 minutes. It was a rainy Saturday when I sat down at my chipped kitchen table and launched something no one believed I could build. A digital marketplace for American artists and designers, Blue Harbor, named after a place I once dreamed of escaping to. I poured myself into it, every sleepless hour, every forgotten meal. I learned to code websites from scratch, wrote product descriptions by moonlight, begged local artists to give me a chance to showcase their work. The first year was brutal. Some weeks, diapers and food felt like luxury items. I typed through the night while Donald slept beside me in a used crib, my fingers raw from overuse. I watched YouTube tutorials on marketing and taxes, figured out shipping logistics with pen and paper, and failed spectacularly, repeatedly. But failure didn't scare me. Going back did. Slowly, things began to shift. A popular lifestyle blog discovered us, and orders surged overnight. Every dollar I earned went back into the business: better design, more inventory, 2 part-time assistants, a new logo. Soon, I was fielding calls from New York, Los Angeles. No one in that house ever asked where I went. They assumed I was running from something. They were half right. I was running. But not from shame. From them. The moment the big retailers began circling, I knew Blue Harbor had crossed into something far more dangerous than a dream. It had become power. And power, I learned, was the only language the world really respected. They came with polished proposals, partnerships dressed in honeyed words. But I didn't flinch. I negotiated with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. I kept the reins tight, refused to give up control, even when the offers came from names that used to intimidate me. For once, I trusted my gut. And it paid off. Within 3 years, Blue Harbor was no longer a side project born of desperation. It was an empire. Mine. American tech giants wanted exclusive rights to our digital art prints to hang in their glass towers. European fashion houses, names I'd once seen only in magazines, sought collaborations for limited edition capsule lines. I flew to Paris, to London, to Zurich. Met with executives in boardrooms of glass and stone, sipped espresso in ancient villas and high-rise lounges. And through it all, I wore my armor: jeans, soft cardigans, a plain leather tote. The freelancer disguise. I signed contracts worth millions, and they never suspected I was the one calling the shots. My net worth climbed until it reached the impossible. $94 million. And yet, I kept my old SUV. Still took calls from my mother while folding laundry. Still let them think I was barely scraping by. I bought the house in Beaufort outright so my mother could finally sleep through the night without the weight of a mortgage. But I let her believe it came from a church donor, someone blessed and generous. Each month, I sent Andrew a payment big enough to wipe out his law school loans and pat his ego. The wire came from a shell corporation with a generic name: anonymous, clean. Even their luxurious trip to Paris, the one Andrew boasted about every Christmas over turkey and wine, had been quietly financed by me. My accountant made sure the trail was invisible. Looking back, maybe I should have told them. Maybe it would have shifted something, made them pause, reevaluate who I was. But the truth? They never asked. Not once. They were content with their assumptions. They believed Dad's dusty pension bankrolled their suburban paradise. Or that Andrew had friends in high places. Whatever made the fantasy easier to maintain. I let them. Out of habit, maybe. Out of exhaustion. But after that Thanksgiving, when I finally returned to my apartment, my real home, the one not soaked in judgment, I didn't feel grief. I felt fury. Donald had fallen asleep in the back seat, tear-streaked cheeks pressed against his coat. I carried him to bed, tucked him in, and kissed his forehead. Then I sat down at my laptop. For the first time all day, my hands were steady. I opened my financial dashboard, that quiet monument to everything I had built. Dozens of line items flashed across the screen: mortgage payments, Andrew's deposits, utility bills for the Beaufort house, insurance for Mom, maintenance on Dad's precious new car. Their world had been running on my engine. My time. My blood. And still, I was the family disgrace. I stared at the numbers like they were old scars. I remembered every solo birthday, every holiday where I sat on the fringe, the invisible one. The girl they humored but never welcomed. Then, one by one, I began shutting it all down. I ended the mortgage transfers. Cut off Andrew's monthly deposits. Cancelled the automatic payments for utilities and insurance. I sent an email to my attorney revoking access to the family trust. And I called the bank to deactivate Dad's credit card. Not once did my hands tremble. At first, it felt clinical. Cold. But as the weight lifted, something new stirred in me, something close to relief. No more secrets. No more enabling. I had been the invisible benefactor for too long. The silent spine propping up a family that never once turned around to see who was holding the weight. That era ended the moment I closed my laptop. I looked around my living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Donald's little shoes were by the door. His crayon drawings hung on the fridge like badges of hope. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a stranger. I felt rooted. Real. I knew whatever storm might come from this reckoning, I would stand tall in it. I don't remember booking the flight to Honolulu. Only that I did it minutes after cutting the financial lifelines. I needed a place where no one knew my name. No one expected me to apologize. A place where I could wake up without bracing for shame. I needed the ocean. I needed the sun. Most of all, I needed peace. And I was finally ready to fight for it. The beach house waited for me like an old friend who had always known I'd come running one day. I bought it quietly, 2 years ago, in the early bloom of Blue Harbor's success. To my family, it was a nondescript condo near the airport, a practical place for business travel. In reality, it was anything but modest. A sleek, glass-front sanctuary perched on the sand, where the Pacific greeted me each morning with open arms. Floor-to-ceiling windows invited the light in like a lover. Polished wood floors shimmered in the sun. Palm trees lined the edges of the property, their fronds whispering secrets to the sea breeze. It was everything I had ever imagined for myself, calm, open, and finally, entirely mine. Donald was half asleep when we landed in Honolulu, his head heavy on my shoulder as we drove through winding roads framed by bougainvillea and palms. But the second he saw the ocean, he lit up. "Mom, there's sand right outside the door," he shouted, pressing his face to the window. His joy was contagious, bright and unfiltered. I let it wash over me, let his laughter fill the hollow spaces inside me where happiness used to live. He raced through the house like a storm of light, opening doors, tumbling across rugs, spinning in circles on the patio that overlooked the endless stretch of beach. The next morning, we woke to sunlight pouring in like liquid gold. I brewed coffee barefoot while Donald pressed his nose to the window, eyes wide with wonder. "Can we go outside?" he asked, voice sleepy but eager. I nodded, still in my pajamas. We carried our toast and juice onto the deck, where the world felt untouched by judgment. I wrapped myself in a blanket while Donald ran into the sand, digging with his hands, his toes wiggling joyfully beneath the grains. He built his first sandcastle as gulls wheeled overhead. No one was there to shame me for wearing flannel at 9 a.m. or letting my son get dirty before breakfast. There was no performance required. No role to play. Just the hush of the waves, the warmth of the sun, and Donald's pure, unburdened laughter threading across the empty shore. Later, we wandered down the beach together, collecting shells and smooth stones worn by time. Donald chased seagulls, shrieking with glee every time they took flight. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, something inside me softened. There were no eyes watching. No expectations to crush me. I didn't have to shrink myself to fit someone else's vision of who I was supposed to be. I could breathe again. Somewhere along that shoreline, I found my smile again, unexpected and raw. I caught myself laughing aloud, surprised at the sound. At night, after Donald fell asleep, his hair still salty from the sea, I would sit on the balcony with a glass of wine, the air fragrant with plumeria and hibiscus. The ocean sang its endless lullaby. I watched the sun surrender to the horizon, sky blazing in violet and gold, and thought about everything I had given away in the name of love, peace, and family. The late nights. The sacrificed dreams. The years I bent myself backward so they wouldn't see how tall I was becoming. Here, under a sky unburdened by memory, I began to remember the woman I'd once been before their voices drowned her out. Not just Donald's mother. Not just the silent financier of a family who could barely look me in the eye. But a woman with stories to tell. With something to say. So I started writing again. Not for profit, not for reputation. Just for me. Short stories, poems, scraps of fiction and truth blurred together in the quiet. My laptop, once a machine of commerce, became a vessel for recovery. Some nights, I wrote about heartbreak. Some nights, about hope. I wrote about the girl I used to be, the one who fought to be seen, and the woman I was now becoming, fearless, self-made, unapologetically whole. As the days passed, so did the silence inside me. Something new began to form. A sense of purpose beyond revenge, beyond healing. It was a thought that had followed me since Donald's birth, tucked away like a secret wish. The knowledge that there were millions of women out there just like me. Women raising children alone, drowning in shame they didn't earn, invisible to a world that only noticed them when they failed. I remembered the fear. The isolation. The way the world seemed built to punish women who chose to survive on their own terms. And I knew I couldn't forget that. So one afternoon, while Donald's laughter spilled through the open doors and the sun warmed the tiles beneath my feet, I opened a new notebook. And I began to sketch out a plan. A charity, not just a gesture, but a mission. One born not of pity, but of shared fire. A place to lift other women the way no one had lifted me. The beginnings of something bold. Something that looked a lot like justice. I called it Harbor of Hope. A refuge for single mothers like me, women carrying the weight of two lives in a world that offered little mercy. It wasn't about charity, it was about dignity. Support, resources, and encouragement with no judgment and no strings. I seeded the foundation with $1 million of my own money. Not a bailout, not a bandage for someone else's disaster. This time, my money would build, not rescue. I drafted programs in furious detail. Emergency grants for rent and food, legal aid for custody battles, childcare stipends, scholarships for mothers who wanted to finish school or start anew. I wrote to lawyers and financial advisors, asking the right questions, setting it up not as a vanity project, but as a legacy. Every decision felt like reclamation. For once, I wasn't throwing lifelines to people who called me a disgrace with one breath and cashed my anonymous checks with the next. I was building something real. Something that would outlast the whispers. I imagined mothers and children who would never know my name but would have a shot at safety, maybe even joy, because of what I'd created. That thought alone made my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt in years, not from pain, but from purpose. Donald and I carved out a new rhythm. Mornings barefoot on the sand. Afternoons reading under the porch awning, the scent of salt and sunscreen clinging to us. Evenings full of his giggles, our shared jokes, the soft glow of the setting sun casting long, forgiving shadows on the walls. The house came alive with warmth, with laughter, with the kind of love that doesn't ask you to shrink. It was everything my childhood home wasn't. Sometimes I'd pause just to breathe it in, the ocean breeze through open windows, Donald's small hand tangled in mine, the knowledge that for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Thanksgiving still haunted the edges of my memory like a bruise not fully faded. But out here, with the Pacific rising and falling like a lullaby, their voices became smaller. Every wave crushed their judgment into silence. In its place, I heard the gentler cadence of my own. I didn't need their approval. All I ever needed was this boy who loved me without condition, a cause I believed in, and the courage to stop asking for a seat at their table. It was late afternoon when my phone rang. The sun was low, casting the living room in molten gold and deep tangerine. Donald was on the porch, talking to the neighbor's golden retriever, his laughter tumbling into the air like music. I almost let the call go to voicemail. The number said Charleston. I didn't need to look twice to know it was her. Part of me ached to let it ring out, to let silence answer for once. But habits die slowly. So I answered. Her voice was thin, fragile. The kind of tremble that only surfaces when fear creeps in. Her southern accent curled heavier around the edges, the way it always did when she was nervous. Kimberly, honey, we need help. A pause. The bank called. They said the mortgage is past due. I don't know what happened. Your father, he's not taking it well. I let her words pass through me like wine through tall grass. Once, a call like this would have sent me spiraling, guilt rising like floodwater. I would have opened my laptop in a panic, wiring money before the shame could take hold. But now I was still. I sat at the kitchen table, looking out over the ocean, waves pulsing with calm, and took a deep breath. "Mom," I said quietly, the firmness in my voice undeniable, "I need you to really listen to me." A pause on the line. I knew she heard the difference. The lack of urgency. The absence of apology. "I paid for everything," I said, each word slow, deliberate. "The house. The cars. The bills. All of it, for years. You never knew, because I made it easy not to. I did it because I love you. Because I wanted you to be safe." She gasped softly, but I kept going. "But after what happened on Thanksgiving, after what Dad said, after you both sat there and let me be humiliated in front of my child, something in me changed." Her breath caught again. I could hear the tears coming, quiet and familiar. The same broken sobs I remembered when she lost her mother. "Oh, Kimberly," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. We didn't know. I swear to you, if I had known." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see. "That's just it, Mom. You never asked." Silence stretched long and taut between us. "You never wanted to know who I really was," I continued. "It was always about how I didn't fit, how I made things harder. Even after everything I gave, it was never enough to make you proud. There was nothing left to soften. No more disguises to wear. Only the truth, standing bare between us like the final act of a long, bitter play." My voice trembled, just for a moment. But I caught it, steadied it, like I had learned to do so many times before. "I forgive you, Mom. But things have to change." I took a breath, the kind that clears everything out. "I'm not your mistake to hide anymore. I'm your daughter. And I'm proud of what I've done." She sniffled. Then her words came in a frantic rush, as if trying to gather up years in one breath. "Kimberly, please let us make it right. Come home. Your father, he regrets it. I know he does. He's just stubborn. You know how he is. And Andrew, he says he never wanted you to leave like that. We need you. I need you." I closed my eyes. Let the sound of the ocean fill the silence between her plea and my reply. I thought of all the years I had bent myself into someone else's shape, smiling through shame, shrinking for their comfort, swallowing my voice just to be allowed a seat at the table. The old Kimberly might have rushed to forgive. She would have patched the cracks, brushed away her pain, and handed them one more chance wrapped in silence. But I wasn't her anymore. I had found peace, not the brittle kind you perform, but the kind that settles in your bones and refuses to be negotiated. "Mom," I said, calm and clear, "I love you. I always will. But I can't go back to how things were. I won't pretend I don't have value just because it's easier for everyone else." I heard her breathing, soft and uneven, but I kept going. "If you and Dad want me in your lives, it has to be on new terms. I won't be your secret shame. I won't sit at a table where I'm talked down to. Not anymore." There was a pause so long I thought she might hang up. Then her voice, barely a whisper, came through the static. "You're right, Kimberly. You're absolutely right. I want you to be happy. I want to know you. The real you. I don't want to lose you again." Tears filled my eyes, not from pain, but from release. The kind of tears you cry when a weight you've carried too long finally slides off your shoulders. After we hung up, I stayed there at the table as the sky shifted from gold to deep indigo. The last edge of sun disappeared beneath the horizon, and in its place, the stars emerged, one by one, like promises kept. I thought of every sleepless night I'd poured into building Blue Harbor. The quiet generosity. The years I was nothing more than the shadow behind the safety net. For so long, I had measured my worth by how small I could become, how invisible I could stay, how many fires I could put out before anyone noticed they were burning. But now, I saw clearly. My value wasn't in how much I gave away to people who didn't care to ask where it came from. It was in the life I had built. In the little boy I was raising with love. In the hope I was offering women who had once felt as invisible as I did. The days passed. My mother and I kept in touch, carefully, honestly. Our conversations were slow and uneven, but they were real. Then, one day, a card arrived in the mail from my father. No apology. No grand gestures. Just a single line written in his heavy block handwriting. "We miss you. We're proud, even if we don't say it." It was more than I'd ever expected. Andrew called once. The call was awkward, filled with half-finished thoughts and nervous laughter. But it was something. He asked about Donald. Told me about a new case at work. No tension. No competition. Just a brother remembering how to be a brother. There was no sudden transformation. No neat cinematic ending. But something had shifted. For the first time, they didn't see me as the family failure. They saw me. Back in Honolulu, I poured myself into this new life. Donald and I continued our beachside adventures. We built sandcastles, collected driftwood, chased sea foam and dreams. Harbor of Hope launched its first grant program. The emails began to trickle in, notes from women across the country. Strangers who had never seen my face, writing to say thank you. That someone believed in them. That they no longer felt alone. My days were full. My heart, at peace. And in the quiet evenings, after Donald had fallen asleep and the world held its breath, I'd think back to that moment, the one that cracked everything open. That Thanksgiving. That single word. All right. It was so simple. But it had become my rebellion. My reckoning. My release. Because sometimes, freedom doesn't come in a battle cry. Sometimes, it comes in a whisper. In a small, firm promise you make to yourself. I will never again live small for the comfort of others. And so, I live now, not as someone else's disappointment, not as the family's reluctant afterthought. But as myself. Proud. Imperfect. Extraordinary. Here, in my beach house in Honolulu, with the ocean whispering through open windows, I finally believe what I had never been told. I am enough. And I always was.